During World War II, when Hitler came into power in Germany, a huge conflict began. Through Hitler's anti-Semitic views and the Nazis' agreement of the views, Hitler's power rose from Chancellor to dictator of Germany. This led to the murder of over 6 million Jews by Nazis, but one Jewish man, Dr. Jacob Eisenbach, was able to survive one of the most controversial times in history, known as the Holocaust. However, the large amounts of anti-Semitism caused most of Dr. Eisenbach's family to perish. Because many people had multiple views about Jewish people, and these various perspectives caused major conflict, the only way the conflict could be settled was through a forced compromise. World War II was Germany and its few allies versus the Allies, a powerful group consisting of many countries working towards stopping the Nazi army. The different perspectives throughout the war and the time period paint a vivid picture about what was actually going on.
Dr. Jacob Eisenbach is a survivor from the Holocaust who retells many of his stories at speaker sessions. After the end of World War II, he immigrated to America from Lodz, Poland, where he achieved his lifelong dream of being a dentist. He worked at his own dentistry until he was 92 years old. After that, he began to talk about his experiences through life. No matter how dark the clouds may be, there will always be a day when the sun will break through. Which means, never lose hope for a better tomorrow. That hope has been my guide. That was one of his quotes about his experiences in his early life. Some of which included him experiencing his hometown turning into a prison for Jews, his sister being brutally killed by a machine gun, his dad being forced into hard labor at a munition camp in Germany, and him being separated from his family.
Adolf Hitler, leader of the Nazi Party, formed the ideas that came to be known as the Nazi ideology. A person's characteristics, attitudes, abilities, and behavior were determined by his or her so-called racial makeup. All groups or races had within them traits that were immutably transmitted from one generation to the next. No individual could overcome the innate qualities of race, and all of human history could be explained in terms of racial struggle. The Nazis also believed in survival of the fittest. For the Nazis, survival of a race depended upon its ability to reproduce and multiply, its accumulation of land to support and feed that expanding population, and its vigilance in maintaining the purity of its gene pool, thus preserving the unique racial characteristics with which nature had equipped it for success in the struggle to survive. Since each race desired to expand, and since the space on Earth was limited, the struggle for survival resulted quote-unquote naturally in violent conquest and military confrontation. Thus, war, even constant war, was a part of nature, a part of the human condition. Hitler further believed that the lack of living space quenched the birth rate among Germans to dangerously low levels. To make matters worse, Germany had lost World War I and had been forced by the Treaty of Versailles to give up thousands of miles of valuable land to its neighbors. To survive, Hitler contended, Germany must break the closure of the country by its enemies and conquer vast territories in the east from the Slavs. The conquest of the East would provide Germany with the space required to greatly expand its population, with the resources to feed that population, and with the means to realize the biological density of being a master race with the appropriate status of a world power. Hitler and the Nazi Party outlined their racial enemies in clear and straightforward terms. Hitler insisted that territory was vital because the expanding population of a race required it. Without new territory to support an expanding population, Hitler believed the race would ultimately stagnate and face eventual disappearance.
To define a race, the Nazis affixed stereotypes, both positive and negative. This includes ethnic group appearance, behavior, and culture. These were allegedly unchangeable. It also includes biological inheritance, intellectual development, or socialization. For the Nazis, understanding of a member of one race into another culture or ethnic group was impossible because of the original inherited traits could not change. They could only degenerate through so-called race mixing.
The Nazis also put forward the idea that Germans were members of a superior group of races that he called Aryan. The German Aryan race was gifted above all other races, Hitler claimed, with this biological superiority destining the Germans to rule a vast empire across Eastern Europe. In the end, Hitler's program of war and genocide stemmed from what he saw as an equation. Aryan Germans would have to expand and dominate, a process requiring the elimination of all racial threats, especially the Jews, or else they would face extinction themselves. Hitler believed that this was the way nature worked and ultimately started World War II. The Nazis murdered over 6 million Jews and millions of people of other nationalities, all due to Hitler's unethical belief.
The Allies in World War II did not tolerate any of Hitler's actions. Simply calling themselves the Allies, this united force of World War II consisted of powers from France, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and, of course, the USA. Each country joined at a different time period of the war. After the Soviet Union was being mostly overpowered by Hitler and the Nazis, the Allies began to think of a new strategy. Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin wanted to plan an invasion of Germany, while Winston Churchill of Britain suggested something else. He said that they should slowly attack the edges and borders of Germany, while bombing them from the air. When President Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the U.S. decided to agree with this strategy, Stalin had no choice but to give in with their strategy. This strategy proved to be a good one for the Allies and against Germany.
The Allies also had to think of other ways to solve conflicts with the Nazis. One notable aspect of the strategy of the Nazis was German U-boats, or submarines. The Nazis would use them to sink over 3 million tons of Allied shipping in only one half of 1942. To deal with this, the Allies had thought out a new system on convoys, while also building way more cargo ships than the Nazis would ever have a chance of sinking. However, in 1942, the Allies began to take further strides into forcing a surrender of Germany. In the summer of that year, planes began bombing specific areas in Germany, killing over 60,000 people in the city of Hamburg and relatively destroying the city of Dresden. Later, the Allies traveled to North Africa to attack one of Hitler's best generals, Erwin Rommel. In 1943, American troops were overpowered at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. After that, troops from the US, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand worked together to drive Axis forces, which consisted of mainly Germany, Italy, and Japan, out of Egypt. After their attacks in Africa, they invaded Sicily, while also advancing towards Italy's mainland. The leader of Italy was overthrown, then executed by his people. This caused the German army to deploy many troops into Italy, which delayed Italy's full control by the Allies until the end of 1944. While all of this was happening, the Soviet army began working on keeping the invading Germans out, although the losses of civilians and military troops had outnumbered the total amount of battles the Soviets had won. But Great Britain, under the leadership of America's President Dwight D. Eisenhower, was planning a huge invasion, which is now known as D-Day. These attacks ultimately led to the suicide of Adolf Hitler, consequently leading to the surrender of the Nazis and the surrender of Japan, marking the end of World War II. However, the perspective of the Allies to stop the Axis forces and the strategy carried out was key to ending the Holocaust and World War II.
On May 7, 1945, Germany signed an unconditional surrender at Allied headquarters in Reims, France. A day later, the Allies accepted Germany's surrender, about a week after Adolf Hitler had committed suicide. Germany surrendered because of Hitler's poor decisions and didn't really have a choice anyway. This is why this war ended in a forced compromise. Dr. Jacob Eisenbach, Hitler and the Nazis, and the Allies all had different perspectives about the war, and it gives us a better view and more insight about it. Through a bitter conflict to a forced compromise, viewing different perspectives paints a multifaceted picture in which people will remember as the Holocaust.